There was a news story in 2010 that captured my attention for 69 days. From August 10th through October 13th in Chile, you might remember this, 33 coal miners were trapped 2,300 feet underground. The whole coal mine had just collapsed on them. I always hook into stories about people trapped underground because I have a particularly primal kind of phobia of being trapped in any small space, but underground is really intense. And I'm also the great-granddaughter of a coal miner, and so I think from a young age, I always had this fascination with those who had to go into the bowels of the earth in order to do their labor, and how much I associated that with like Hades, with actually having to go to work in a kind of a hell, a kind of inferno. And my sense of my great-grandfather was that he must be such a courageous man to be able to do that every day. He lost a finger to his work, and he also died of black lung. So every time that the coal miners came to mind, as they would throughout the day, I would just kind of stop wherever I was and offer up a prayer, or just say, "Oh my God, you guys, I'm thinking of you. Please get them out." Just stop and acknowledge what was going on. When the coal miners were liberated, when they were rescued out of their hell, I wanted to know, how did they psychologically survive this ordeal? What had gotten them through without just losing it? They had nearly starved. There were times when violence threatened to break out among them. There was one of the coal miners who would joke that they were going to resort to cannibalism. And as time went by, it was less and less a joke. It seemed like something that might actually have to happen. And also for the first 2 weeks, their first 2 entire weeks trapped down there, they had had no contact with the outside world at all. So they had no idea if there was even a rescue effort. I mean, they just didn't know. And they were drinking water that had oil in it. You know, very frightening. And I saw one of the miners interviewed, and I haven't been able to locate the actual quote, but he said that basically what kept us from losing it completely and doing dire things was that they tried to conduct their days as normally as they could. So for instance, when they thought the sun was rising, because they really didn't have any way of telling, I don't know that they had watches or timepieces down there, they would wake up and they ate their tiny bit of rationed food at noon. So I guess they must have had clocks somehow. And I mean, we're talking like their meal was 1 can of tuna shared among all of them and 2 cookies a day. And then it became 1 cookie per man every 3 days. So this is what they were dealing with. But they had that meal as it was at noon. They always had a time for prayer. So they had church. They played some games, so they had leisure time. They tried to just conduct their day as normally as they could. And I think it mattered a lot that they named their encampment Esperanza, hope. It was a wise decision because even when they fell into despair, they had literally located themselves in hope. I have ever after both heard and given the advice that coal miner made me aware of, which is for anyone who feels themselves to be in that coal mine where they cannot see the sun for reasons of grief or depression or existential dread, I say, and I have heard recommended, just try to live the day, the procession of the hours, in as accustomed a way as you can in order to stay grounded in a reality that makes at least some sense when you can barely see your hand in front of your face, let alone a bright future. Just try to do the day. Something that the ancients knew, who were figuring out a way to narrate the story of the life of Jesus of Nazareth is that humanity is in many ways abiding or abides in a permanent state of darkness. They called it sin. We might call it evil or sinfulness or brokenness or alienation. But whatever we call it, there is always at every point in history plenty of evidence that humanity still stumbles in this condition. That's not all there is, of course, but it's very much part of the human condition. We live, we die. There's never enough time to perfect the human endeavor, let alone come to a common agreement about what the human endeavor should be. No generation lives long enough to continue to perfect the improvements of the previous generations or to fix what the previous generations may have screwed up. It's really the divine comedy and tragedy. So when those early mystics, reporters, and evangelists, some of whom were named Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, who recorded the life of Jesus, told their story, several of them, not all of them, but several of them began with the story of Jesus' birth, of which there was no actual historical record anywhere, of course. But they did this, they created this backstory in order to give Jesus a place not just in the history of first century Palestine, but in the cosmic order itself. And in order to make explicit what they believed, which is that Jesus was the fulfillment of the prophets who foretold the coming of a Messiah. And particularly, they pulled from Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, who called the coming Messiah Wonderful Counselor, Prince of Peace. So if you're singing the Messiah, Handel's Messiah this season, and you get to those lyrics, they come out of the prophet Isaiah. Out of this birth narrative, whose significance is actually super radical, and we'll be talking more about that next week, grew the observance of a whole season of Advent, a time of preparation that emphasizes the spiritual disciplines of waiting and patience within a condition of mystery, of unknowing. Waiting is the spiritual practice of Advent. And we light just one candle per week that each has a traditional meaning that helps us identify what it is we yearn for as we wait, what we long for in the dark nights of the individual and the collective soul. We yearn for hope. We yearn for peace. We yearn for love. We yearn for joy. They each get one big candle in the wreath, and on Christmas, there is sometimes a center white candle called the Christ candle. So Advent introduces all of us to the unusual notion that waiting is not a waste of time or an irritation, but is in fact a sacred activity that can teach great wisdom. I'm not talking about waiting in line to get your movie ticket, which you don't even do anymore because we get them online, or waiting for the plumber to get to the house. I'm talking about the kind of waiting between one state of being and another, where we may have no idea what is happening, or in fact, if anything at all is happening, and this experience can be emotionally and physically difficult. Waiting to see if the chemo has been effective. Waiting in the barren desert of a relationship that really isn't working, hoping that some freshness may break through, or some insight or sense of commitment that may make it meaningful to stay in the relationship. Waiting after the hard campaigning to see what the outcome of an election will be. The waiting of pregnancy, where the body is growing a new life and the mother wonders, what will happen to me? Who will I be now? Observe sometime what happens to young adults at holiday gatherings. There's this incredible barrage that is often kind of hurled upon them as they are aggressively peppered with questions about what they're going to do, what jobs they're going to get, or what they want, where do they want to go to school, when are you going to get married? It depends where you are in the young adult cycle. You know, what's going on? What's next? I have sympathy for those young adults who just want to go hide in a room. We have to learn to wait with our young people, give them space for no being and no planning, because we all need that space. And we need to teach them and to model for them that nothing creative can germinate in relentless sunlight and knowing, not even the basic structure of our own lives. Advent means to come. In the Christian narrative, what is coming is the inbreaking of the holy to the earthly, divine nature born in a baby who brings a revelation about how we can live and what it is we ought to be living for, which is each other. But before the birth, the pregnancy, the waiting, the unknowing. I grew up in a Unitarian Universalist household with two atheistic parents. At least they rejected traditional concepts of God, and they were spiritual but not religious. But we did a big, big Christmas. Really, we did it really big and really magical, and our Christmas morning was really joyous. So I went off to seminary in 1994, and during my internship at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Medford, my supervising minister said to me sometime in October, "So, awesome, you're going to be here Christmas Eve, you'll do that service, and I'm going to take it off." And I panicked right away, and I thought, like, what? But I didn't say anything, of course. I just had this wild galloping horses feeling inside of me. Because who was I if I wasn't a daughter and sister on Christmas Day? Who was I if I wasn't the best Christmas present giver since my dad died? I hadn't really realized that becoming a minister would mess with my Christmas. Like, not very bright, right? I can't tell you how bereft I felt when I realized that all my friends and roommates and classmates would be gone for Christmas and I would have nowhere to go that day. My mom lived 8 hours away by car, so that wasn't an option. So I decided not to fight it because I needed to be back for church in a few days anyway. So I decided, well, all right, I can't fight this thing, so I'm just going to really enter into the sadness and separate myself from everything. And I decided to go on silent retreat at Mount St. Mary's Abbey in Wentham. Or is it Rentham? All those names, they sound alike. Wareham, Wentham, Rentham, Wenham. The first thing I noticed when I got to the convent is that the sisters didn't have any Christmas decorations up. They had this really cute little Rudolph sign that they put on the door of the convent that I was staying at. It said, "Welcome Victoria," which I thought was incredibly cute. But the one concession they had made to the holiday was that they had a barn. So the abbey is on a big farm. And they had a barn, and they had just had this one big star lit over the barn. So I had driven down to Rentham late Christmas Eve after 2 of our Christmas Eve services, and I woke up Christmas morning to total stillness. I went down and ate some breakfast in silence and solitude. No one else was on retreat that day. I felt like such a loser. And I struggled with grief, homesickness, loss, pain. I had no phone. They didn't have a phone there, so I couldn't talk to anyone. I paced. I picked up books. I put them down. I wrote in my journal a little bit. I thought I was being patient with whatever I needed to understand or let go of in order to be in less pain. But of course I was pushing it. I wasn't being patient. I wanted a comforting revelation now. I wanted hope, joy, love, peace now. Although in the busyness of seminary coursework and my internship hours at the church, I hadn't cultivated any of those things. I had lit the Advent candles, but I hadn't made any room in my heart or mind for what God might be doing that I wasn't doing. And that's a fast track to a very barren inner landscape. So finally, at about 2 o'clock that afternoon, I decided I'm going to take a walk. It was a warm day for late December, and I walked the grounds. I looked at that star over the barn, and my thoughts turned from myself to the community of nuns in the convent who had offered this hospitality. Who were they on Christmas Day? What had they given up? What had they received from doing something so weird with their lives? And then it occurred to me as I was thinking of them as being weird, that I was also in the process of becoming one of those weird, officially religious people. And I thought, gosh, these women are married to Jesus, and I'm pretty sure none of them went shopping for his birthday. And I wondered, do they give each other presents? Like, do they get stockings? So not wanting to brood anymore on my own thoughts, I decided I wanted to be closer to these women, to the sisters, and I wandered to the Abbey sanctuary. And I happened to, just the timing was perfect, I happened to wander into one of the 8 daily short services of praise and worship. And these are centered on the reading and chanting of the Psalms, which are observed in all the Christian monastic traditions. I had stumbled into None, the 3rd hour after the noon service. I sat in the sanctuary, the only one there, and there was a little wall kind of a thing, like a grate, a wooden grate, and the sisters were on the other side of the grating. And I listened to them chant and sing and pray, and they were not good singers. They were not. But they were beautiful, and they did this 8 times a day. It was their work every day. They stopped everything they did for the canonical hours, and they prayed and they chanted. And this was starting at sunrise. They did this. The abbess told me later that the sisters did not change the liturgy for Christmas, except that one of the hymns was different. That's it. The rest of the time, aside from observing the hours, the sisters lived in a community of silence. She alone had permission to speak with outsiders and the authority to do so. These women had chosen to dedicate their lives to the silence in patience, praying at their appointed times for you and for me and for all of the suffering. They were praying for the young man who doesn't know what to do with his life. They were praying and still pray today for the pregnant woman who is nervous about childbirth and mothering. They pray for those who are depressed, for those who are anxious. They were praying for the coal miners trapped in the bowels of the earth. They were praying every day at those set hours, not knowing what God would do, but in faith that there was and is a powerful and loving force in the universe which creates and sustains and redeems all of it. And I was so grateful to them, and still am, for holding that sacred time for all of us, for practicing it every single day, which cannot be easy, on behalf of the world. I realized that for the sisters, for the Cistercian nuns, centering their whole existence around prayer means that they intentionally miss out on pretty much everything that you and I chase in the hopes that those things might bestow some peace, might bestow some joy upon us. I think of them in this Advent 20 plus years later. I think of them, the Chilean coal miners, so 8 years later, enduring their time of trial in the darkness of unknowing. And I think of the Cistercian nuns of Mount St. Mary's Abbey in Wrentham, Massachusetts, not merely enduring, but embracing the condition of unknowing, waiting in that blessed darkness of the great mystery, chanting and praying at each of those set hours, not just to observe the passage of time, but to mark each moment of it as sacred. In this season, pregnant with possibility, may we also embrace, rather than merely endure, the mystery that is obscured in the generative darkness. So may it be.